I never imagined my life would unravel like this. At 45, I thought I had it all figured out. A 23-year marriage, two beautiful daughters, a comfortable life. But everything I believed in crumbled the day I discovered the truth about my husband. His name was David, though saying it now feels like swallowing glass. For 23 years, I called him my partner, my love, the father of my children. He was 49 when he died, but our story ended long before that car crash took him from this world. It started in 2020. While the world locked down and families drew closer together, my husband found solace in someone else's arms. She was 20 years old, younger than the gap between us, closer in age to our daughters than to him. I didn't know any of this, of course. I went about my days, working, caring for our girls, believing in the sanctity of what we'd built together. The revelation came in March of this year, delivered not by my husband's confession, but by the birth announcement of twin boys. His twin boys, with her. I remember the exact moment my world shifted on its axis. My daughters, my precious girls, 14 and 16 at the time, came home from what I thought was a routine visit with their father. Their faces were pale, their eyes red-rimmed from crying. They'd been to the hospital, they told me. Not because anyone was sick, but because their father wanted them to meet their new baby brothers. He'd sworn them to secrecy, tried to make them complicit in his betrayal. But my girls were braver than he ever gave them credit for. They told me everything. The divorce proceedings that followed were a nightmare wrapped in legal fees and property disputes. We owned several properties together, and David had been using our shared account to finance his double life. We needed accountants, lawyers, endless documentation to untangle the financial web he'd woven. Every meeting, every piece of paper felt like another cut across my heart. And David, the man I'd loved, the man I'd built a life with, transformed into someone I didn't recognize. He called me names I won't repeat here. He blamed me for his infidelity, as if I'd somehow forced him into the arms of a girl barely out of her teens. He became cruel, abusive even, trying to kick me out of my own childhood home, a property that wasn't even part of our marital assets. My daughters bore the brunt of his anger too. For telling me the truth, for refusing to keep his dirty secret, he turned on them with a viciousness that still makes my blood boil. They'd gone from being daddy's little girls to inconvenient obstacles in his new life. We were so close to finalizing everything when the call came. There'd been an accident, a car crash. Both David and his affair partner were killed instantly. By some miracle, the twin babies survived without a scratch, tucked safely in their car seats while their parents' lives ended in twisted metal and shattered glass. I won't lie and say I felt nothing but grief. Relief mixed with my sorrow in ways that made me feel guilty. Relief that the divorce would be over. Relief that my daughters wouldn't have to shuttle between households, watching their father play happy family with his replacement children. But also genuine sadness for the waste of it all, for the man I'd once loved, for the future that could have been. Then came the aftermath, and with it, expectations I never saw coming. Since we were still legally married when David died, and because he'd never updated his will, all his assets defaulted to me and our daughters. I'm not a monster. I wasn't going to leave those babies destitute. The shared account had about $25,000 in it, and I agreed that whoever became their legal guardian could have it all. But here's where things got complicated. Nobody wanted them. David's parents were both in assisted living facilities, their health too fragile for the demands of infant twins. He had no siblings, and the only aunt who could have taken them flatly refused. She'd been child-free her entire life and wasn't about to change that now, even for family. The affair partner's side of the family presented similar obstacles. Her parents couldn't take them permanently, her sister lived overseas. And then the pressure began. My in-laws, David's parents, started their campaign immediately. I should take the boys, they insisted. I should raise them as my own. After all, wasn't I still, technically, their stepmother? Didn't I have a moral obligation? The affair partner's parents joined the chorus. Even my own mother, and this betrayal cut deepest of all, told me I should step up, that I should be the bigger person. She wasn't thinking about what was right, she just wanted more grandbabies to dote on, consequences be damned. But the truth was simple and painful. I didn't want to. I wouldn't love those boys, not the way children deserve to be loved. Every time I looked at them, I would see David's betrayal. I would see the woman he'd chosen over our family. I would see the lies, the abuse, the destruction of everything I'd held sacred. How could I raise them without resentment? How could I not favor my own daughters, who'd already suffered so much? My daughters made their feelings crystal clear. They hated their baby brothers. Not the babies themselves, really, but what they represented. The affair came to light because of those births, and there was no way to sugarcoat that reality. My girls were old enough to understand exactly what had happened, old enough to feel the betrayal just as keenly as I did. They refused to spend time with their father during the divorce proceedings. They wanted nothing to do with the babies. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. Most of my friends supported my decision. They understood that I was already raising 2 teenage daughters alone now, juggling work and grief and the emotional fallout of betrayal. I didn't have the energy, physical or emotional, to raise infants. I'd done the baby years already, gotten through the sleepless nights and endless diapers and the beautiful exhaustion of early parenthood with my own children. I didn't want to do it again, especially not under these circumstances. But my in-laws wouldn't let it go. Neither would the affair partner's parents. And my mother's pressure felt like a constant weight on my shoulders, her disapproval adding to my guilt. I had 1 week to decide before the boys would go into foster care. They were temporarily placed with their maternal grandparents, but that couldn't last. I needed to make a choice that would affect the rest of my life and the lives of my daughters. After sleepless nights, conversations with my lawyer, and reading countless responses from people who understood my position, I made my decision. I went to meet with the grandparents the next day. The meeting took place in a public restaurant. I'd insisted on that, some instinct telling me I'd need witnesses for what was coming. I can't take the boys. I told them clearly, firmly. I won't be their legal guardian. My mother-in-law's hand flew up so fast, I barely had time to register it. She would have slapped me right there if my father-in-law hadn't caught her wrist. The restaurant's other patrons turned to stare, and I was grateful for their presence, for the social pressure that kept the situation from escalating further. The maternal grandparents pleaded with me, their voices breaking. They didn't want to lose the boys, they said. They couldn't bear it. But they also couldn't care for them, not long term. Then they called me selfish, and something inside me snapped. The only selfish people in this entire mess are you and your children. Your son, I pointed at my in-laws, for cheating on me and making our divorce a living hell for me and my daughters. And your daughter, I turned to the other grandparents, for being the kind of woman who goes after a married man twice her age. I used a harsher word than woman, but you get the idea. If I hear from any of you again, I'll get a cease and desist order. Consider this your warning. I left without ordering, without looking back. My hands were shaking as I sent an email to my lawyer, making sure CPS and every relevant agency knew definitively that I would not be involved with those boys' welfare beyond what I'd already offered financially. But then I discovered something that made my blood run cold. That evening, I sat down separately with each of my daughters. My youngest was unusually quiet, withdrawn in a way that frightened me. My eldest asked if we could talk alone, and that's when the truth came out. My in-laws had been terrorizing them. They'd told my girls they'd need to leave their private school, take jobs right out of high school instead of going to college. Why? Because I'd be spending all the money on the twins' education instead. They'd told them to pack up their belongings and prepare to share a room. The twins would need more space after all. They'd been systematically bullying my daughters, making them feel like second-class citizens in anticipation of a future that I'd never approved or even known about. I was furious. "Your grandparents have no say in where you go to school," I told them firmly. "They have no say in your college funds or how the rooms in our house are arranged. That's my decision and mine alone." I did tell them that part-time jobs during college might be good for them, that scholarships were worth pursuing, but their tuition would be paid. Their futures were secure. They didn't need to sacrifice their dreams for babies who weren't their responsibility. "Don't blame the babies for the stupidity of the adults," I added, hoping to plant seeds of compassion even in the midst of all this pain. They understood, they said, but they still didn't want anything to do with their brothers. Not for now. My eldest qualified. And that, for now, gave me hope. Maybe with time and therapy, wounds could heal. We decided to reclaim our home. David's office, a space that still smelled like his cologne, still held his presence, would become a gaming room for all of us. Pictures of him would come down from the walls and go into albums that the girls could look at when and if they were ready. We wanted to make the house feel like ours again, not his. The legal complications continued to unfold. On Monday, I spoke with my lawyer about the inheritance situation. The twins had no claim until DNA testing proved paternity, and even then, their only claim would be against David's parents' inheritance. The shared account was jointly owned, making it mine. Same with the lake house. David had a personal savings account and life insurance policy, but those had gone to his parents. That would be the extent of what the boys could claim, and even that wasn't certain. My lawyer assured me that given how little David had actually left for my daughters and me, it was unlikely any judge would demand we surrender our assets. In fact, my lawyer strongly recommended I stop offering any money to the boys at all. Doing so could be used against me in court, could be twisted into evidence that I was accepting financial responsibility for them, and should therefore be considered their legal guardian. So I divided the money from the shared account for my daughter's college tuitions. As for the lake house, none of us felt particularly attached to it anymore. I'd decide about selling later. Then came the day CPS removed the boys from their maternal grandparents. I only found out because those grandparents, along with my mother, showed up at my workplace to scream at me. I was actually grateful it happened at work rather than at home. The professional setting provided some protection, some witnesses, but it also made me seriously consider moving. I didn't want my daughters exposed to this level of chaos and anger. The harassment continued. Someone, I suspected the grandparents, gave my information to CPS claiming I was interested in fostering and potentially adopting the twins. The call caught me completely off guard. "There's been a mistake," I explained to the operator. "I'm not interested in fostering these children. Their grandparents have been harassing me, and I think they submitted my information without my knowledge or consent." The operator was speechless at first, then apologetic. She promised to make sure I wasn't bothered about the adoption process again. But the real shock came that same morning when I was served with legal papers. My in-laws were suing for grandparents' rights, not just the twins, but to my daughters as well. They were planning to leave their assisted living facility, buy a house that allowed children, and get custody of all 4 kids. My lawyer immediately sprang into action with protective measures I won't detail here for security reasons, but we both suspected we knew what my in-laws really wanted: my daughters to become parentified caretakers for the twins. With their mobility limitations, they needed young, healthy bodies to do the actual work of raising infants. It would be a cold day in hell before I let that happen. There was a silver lining, though. I started therapy the following week, finally giving myself space to process everything that had happened. My eldest daughter began talking about colleges again, researching programs and campuses with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. We still hadn't visited David's grave. None of us felt ready for that. And I was working hard to stop referring to him as my husband in my own thoughts. I had nothing to do with the funeral arrangements beyond paying the bills. His parents had handled everything, including choosing the epitaph. Devoted and beloved husband, father, and son. The hypocrisy of those words made me sick. When I had time and emotional bandwidth, I planned to change his tombstone. I wanted husband and father removed. It might sound petty to some, but I refused to let lies be carved in stone. David had been neither devoted nor beloved in the end. My daughters deserved better than that, and so did I. I wasn't ready to speak well of a cheater and an abuser just because he was dead, and for anyone who wanted to complain about my plans for the tombstone, I was paying for everything, so they could keep their opinions to themselves. Then, unexpectedly, came good news. Some cousins from David's side of the family, I'll call them Matt and Kim, came forward to adopt the twins. I knew them, had always liked them. They were genuinely good people, the kind who'd provide a stable, loving home. Matt and Kim reached out to my daughters directly, which I appreciated. They let the girls know that if they ever wanted contact with their half-brothers, the door would always be open. But there would be no pressure, no expectations. The boys could simply be distant cousins if that's what my daughters preferred. My girls thanked them politely but firmly stated they weren't interested in a sibling relationship at this time. Maybe eventually they could manage the cousin dynamic, but that was the extent of it. I offered Matt and Kim the money from the shared account. They were family, after all, but they refused. Kim even insisted I use that money for a vacation for my daughters and me instead. "You look like a living dead," she said with gentle concern that brought tears to my eyes. Matt and Kim also set strict boundaries with all the grandparents. They could see the boys, but they wouldn't be treated as grandparents. They'd be more like great uncles and great aunts, with visiting privileges but no authority. This caused an explosion with the affair partner's parents, who threatened to sue for grandparents' rights. Matt and Kim simply cut them off entirely. That's when I learned a disturbing detail. The affair partner's father was a convicted felon in an abuse case. Matt and Kim didn't share specifics out of respect for privacy, but they made it clear that if what they had been told was true, those boys were better off far away from that man. The maternal grandmother had only been granted temporary custody because of the sudden deaths and the time needed to find suitable relatives. To keep the boys permanently, she'd had to live separately from her husband, and she'd refused. My ex-in-laws, realizing their threats weren't working, grudgingly accepted the great-uncle and great-aunt roles. Then they had the audacity to ask if they could move in with my daughters and me. They'd left assisted living recently, they explained, and their old facility didn't have any openings. The waiting list was extensive. They conveniently failed to mention that they'd originally gotten in because David and I had paid for 5 years up front. They still had 2 years paid for, which I'd been planning to honor. Not anymore. After everything they'd put my daughters and me through, I'd rather burn that money than spend it on them. I knew what they really wanted: free caretakers. They expected my daughters and me to wait on them hand and foot while they played victim to their church friends. Absolutely not. My daughters had their own lives to live, and honestly, I was ready to think about dating again. It sounded like I was moving on too quickly, but I'd been emotionally processing the end of my marriage since I'd learned about the affair. I'd already mourned David, or at least I'd mourned the man I thought he was. My eldest daughter had actually been encouraging me to get out there and meet someone new. It was funny, really, getting dating advice from my 16-year-old, but that also showed how mature she'd become, how ready she was to see me happy again. The custody lawsuit dragged on, but at least the boys were safe and together with people who would love them. Mediation came around for the grandparents' rights lawsuit. The court-appointed mediator was there to help us avoid taking up space on an already overcrowded judicial docket. But I knew from the start we'd reach no agreement. My ex-in-laws' demands were absurd. Either full custody of my daughters or a split arrangement where the girls spent weekdays with them and weekends with me. Even the mediator told them they weren't being realistic. My lawyer and I only had one offer, and it was non-negotiable. My daughters would see their grandparents only if they wanted to, when they wanted to, and on their terms. No scheduled visits, no custody arrangement, nothing forced. The mediator thought we were being unfair. That's when things got interesting. Apparently, my ex-in-laws had told the mediator that my daughters were 6 and 4, a full decade younger than their actual ages. They'd been building their case on the premise that these were young children who needed grandparental guidance and support. I provided birth certificates and recent photographs. The mediator looked at the evidence, looked at my ex-in-laws, and shook his head in disbelief. I can't help in this case. These girls are too old for grandparents' rights to even be considered. He'd be sending a recommendation for the grandparents' rights lawsuit to be dropped entirely. The custody case would continue, since neither party agreed on terms, but realistically, my teenage daughters had a say in these matters, and they'd made their feelings abundantly clear. My ex-in-laws were now demanding that I name them legal guardians in my will in case something happened to me. That would never, ever happen. I'd burn my will and die intestate before I gave them any legal control over my children. Then came a strange visit that shed new light on just how deeply the affair had invaded my life. The sister of David's affair partner showed up at my house carrying boxes. Inside were items I immediately recognized as mine, things that should have been safely in storage. My wedding dress, an old jewelry box with a photo of my grandparents, several of my expensive coats and shoes, and most disturbing of all, copies of my personal documents, my passport, IDs, all of it. I found these while cleaning out their place, the sister explained. I used the address on the documents to find you. She was surprisingly nice, apologetic for her sister and parents. She'd refused to take the twins, she told me, because she was tired of being the emergency plan for her family. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. Apparently, the affair partner had bragged about David giving her these items, except for the documents. Those, the sister had no explanation for. But she didn't want anything to do with potential identity theft. She'd brought some other items, too, things that turned out not to be mine. I kept only what belonged to me and sent her on her way. My lawyer helped me freeze my credit immediately. We filed a police report about the possible identity theft. Apparently, reporting a deceased person for this was more common than I'd imagined. It wouldn't result in a posthumous conviction, just paperwork to protect me in case my information had been used for anything illegal. And yes, I burned that wedding dress, made s'mores over the flames with my daughters, the three of us watching the white fabric curl and blacken and turn to ash. Call me petty if you want. I don't care. But the drama wasn't over, because my mother, my own mother, decided to escalate things to a level I never could have anticipated. My relationship with my mother had always been difficult. She was old school, traditional, came to the U.S. from Guatemala when she was 14, married my father here, and raised 13 children, 7 girls and 6 boys. She'd been a homemaker her entire life, never worked outside the house, and tried desperately to instill those same values in her children. She failed spectacularly. Most of my siblings lived as far away from her as humanly possible. 2 had sadly passed away. I was the only one who'd stayed nearby to help care for our parents. Since Dad died, I'd been covering her bills so she could live comfortably. She'd always babied David, always taken his side in any disagreement. She'd even helped him sabotage my birth control after our first daughter was born because they both wanted more children and I'd said I was done. I'd secretly gotten my tubes tied after my youngest was born, never telling them. My mother had berated me for years for only having 2 children, for being faulty, for marrying at the ancient age of 22 when she'd been 16. When David's affair came out, my mother blamed me. I didn't please my husband enough, she said. I was a working woman instead of a homemaker. I hadn't given him enough children. I wasn't pretty anymore. Never mind that David's affair partner was barely older than his own daughters. According to my mother, I deserved his infidelity. She'd been among those furious with me for refusing to adopt the twins. But her newest insanity reached heights I never could have anticipated. It started when my eldest daughter came out to us as gay. I'd suspected, and I was happy she felt comfortable enough to tell me, despite everything else we were dealing with. She told my mother, too, and my mother just ended the video call. Then my mother called me back to scream about how confused and sick my daughter was. She sent me links to conversion camps, to psychologists who claimed homosexuality was a sickness, to political articles about the gay agenda. She wanted to arrange an exorcism. I told her to stop or I'd cut contact entirely. She stopped for exactly 24 hours. Then I started getting Facebook messages from men in their mid-20s asking if it was true that I was looking to marry off my 16-year-old daughter. I blocked them in horror, told them they were sick. 6 more messages came through that night. Then my mother called to tell me cheerfully that she'd found husband prospects for my girls, my high school daughters. She'd given these men my daughters' cell phone numbers. I've never been so angry in my entire life. We all got new phone numbers the next day. The girls set their social media to private, blocked their grandmother on everything. I stopped all financial support for my mother immediately. And yes, I called the police on my own mother, something I never thought I'd have to do. It had only been 2 weeks since I'd cut off my in-laws. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, barely holding it together. And please don't think this is normal for Hispanic families. It's not. My aunts, most of them homemakers too, were absolutely on my side. They supported cutting off my mother and calling the cops. They even suggested we move closer to them in another state. This was just my mother being insane. The police officer we spoke with was incredible. He immediately worked with my lawyer to get a temporary restraining order filed. We'd be working towards a permanent one after that, against my mother and anyone acting on her behalf. The officer even offered to check on us daily. The school was notified. One of my brothers moved in with us for protection. We changed the girls' phone numbers. For now, we were safe. By November, my mother would be completely on her own financially. There was also an investigation into what she'd tried to do, and apparently a very old family investigation had been reopened, something I couldn't discuss publicly yet. Because minors were involved, we might get an expedited restraining order. I was keeping my fingers crossed. After talking with my daughters and my brother, who'd been wonderfully supportive, especially for my eldest, regarding LGBTQ resources, we came to a difficult decision. We didn't like our house anymore. It broke my heart a little. The house had been my childhood home, a gift from my dad. But the reality was it held too much baggage now. The ghost of David's infidelity haunted every room. The girls didn't like being so close to their grandparents. My brother, always blunt, pointed out that the house just wasn't worth the stress. So I started planning repairs with the intention to sell or rent. My brother would stay with us even after we moved. Not forever, maybe, but for as long as we needed him. He'd become a fountain of advice for my eldest, helping her navigate her identity in ways I was still learning. My youngest was doing better too. She was talking normally again, less scared about going out. She got excited about looking for a new house, especially about finding the perfect yard. My job offered transfers, one out of state, another international. The international one was probably a no, but a fresh start somewhere new sounded perfect. As of November, I officially stopped acknowledging my mother. As far as I was concerned, both my parents had died with my father.
5 months later brought the encounter that would finally expose my ex-in-laws' lies to their church community. My daughters and I were at our local farmers market, a weekend tradition we'd maintained despite everything. It was my youngest's 15th birthday week, and though her party was later in the month, I'd given her a budget to get whatever she wanted from the market, mostly chocolate and sweets, knowing her. After an hour of browsing, I started to worry. Just as I was about to call her, my phone rang. It was her, crying, saying some weird people had cornered her. I ran to her location with my oldest daughter in tow and found 6 older women berating my baby girl. They were calling her unchristian for refusing to spend time with her paternal grandparents, for not wanting to be a good big sister to her poor orphaned baby brothers. I got between them and my daughter immediately. "Go pay for your sister's things," I told my eldest. "Then get to the car, both of you." I turned to face the women, some of whom I recognized from my ex-in-law's church. The screaming match that followed was spectacular. They told me I was worse than my daughter for refusing to obey my ex-in-laws like a good Christian wife. Eventually, our yelling got so loud that we were all asked to leave the market. The women followed me to my car like a flock of vultures, still shouting scripture at my back. I got in, locked the doors, and drove away with my shaking daughters. That night, after the girls went to bed, I contacted a friend from that church, one of the reasonable people in the congregation. He told me what had been happening. My ex-mother-in-law had posted a massive sob story to the church's Facebook group. According to her, my daughters and I were horrible people who'd left them homeless and penniless. She claimed my daughters wouldn't even speak to them. She blamed us for losing her grandsons. It was worthy of a Hallmark movie with complete prayer requests and calls for support. The more extremist church members had rallied around her immediately. But here's the thing. This church was incredibly strict about infidelity. It was an unforgivable sin, whether committed by a husband or wife. So how had my mother-in-law gotten around the affair? Simple. She lied. She told everyone the affair partner had been our surrogate, since I couldn't have more children. Then she claimed I didn't want the babies because they were boys. It was disgusting, and it was time to set the record straight. Since the divorce hadn't been finalized when David died, I had no legal ramifications for releasing evidence. So I went to a print shop and got copies of everything. Pictures of David with his affair partner, text conversations between them, messages from my ex-in-laws acknowledging the affair and supporting him through it, emails and texts of them harassing my daughters about their baby brothers. One particularly vile message called my girls bastards and blamed them for their father's death, sent just 2 days after the accident. I paid extra for high-quality paper and spent hours creating beautiful binders that looked like the hymnal packets the church distributed. When you opened them, the first image was of David and his affair partner making out in our living room. Their faces were clearly visible, and she looked nothing like me. Different skin tone, different hair color. Underneath, I'd written, David's and affair partner's names, love story. I took them to the church before service and left them with the hymnals in the back. I knew they never checked those. The gossip mill worked quickly. By the time service ended, Facebook was ablaze. People were calling David and his affair partner names so vile that the pastor himself had to intervene to keep things relatively PG-13. The congregation was furious with my ex-in-laws for how they treated my daughters. I even received apology letters in the mail for my girls, along with an invitation to join the church for support. Interestingly, I was still considered somewhat at fault for the divorce. Apparently, I'd failed in my duties as a wife, but they graciously acknowledged that such failure was understandable given the shock of the affair. They held out hope I might eventually return to the light, unlike my cheating husband and his harlot Jezebel. They used a harsher word than Jezebel, but you get the idea. My ex-in-laws were shamed into leaving the church entirely.
My ex-mother-in-law made a Facebook post about feeling alienated, about how no one cared for the elderly anymore, about how she wished her great son was still alive because he would have taken care of her and her husband. With what money? I wanted to comment. I had been the breadwinner in our marriage. It all came down to that will, the document that had named his parents as beneficiaries instead of our daughters, like he'd told me he had. I never pushed to be named in his will myself. My own will had our daughters as sole beneficiaries. I trusted him to do the same. That trust, like so much else, had been misplaced. That's my story. Messy, complicated, painful, but ultimately one of survival and hope. I'm not the perfect mother, and I've made mistakes along the way, but I've always put my daughters first, and I always will. The tombstone still says husband and father. I haven't changed it yet, but I will when I'm ready, because the last word in this story belongs to me and my daughters, not to the man who broke our trust or the people who tried to break our spirits. We're writing our own ending now, and it's going to be beautiful.